In a small village, there lived a girl named Hifa, well known for her beauty. Her skin glowed like the sun, and she was raised by her grandmother Unia because her mother had passed away when she was a young girl. Her grandmother, an old woman with a wrinkled face and silver-grey hair, took over her guidance. She was sharp, full of stories, and often warned Hifa, "Beauty does not last forever, my granddaughter. One day you will grow old, and all the beauty will be gone." Hifa laughed it off, thinking her grandmother was just trying to keep her humble. But strange things started to happen when she turned 20. She noticed her reflection in the mirror looked different. Her skin became darker, and her eyes weren't as bright as they used to be. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but every day, the reflection grew worse. It was as though the girl in the mirror was slowly changing into someone else, someone older and worn away. One night, unable to sleep, Hifa sneaked out of her room and went to the living room, where an old cracked mirror stood. She looked into it closely and was terrified by her appearance. As she looked more intently, she saw a beautiful figure in the mirror. Startled, she looked again to see if she was dreaming, but the girl in the mirror smiled at her. It was not a real smile. Rather, it was filled with pain. Hifa stumbled back in surprise, breathing hard. When she looked again, she only saw her reflection. She went back to her room. The next day, Hifa went to her friend Sira's house and told her about the ordeal. Sira said, "Maybe you're just tired. Sometimes when you're overthinking or stressed, you see things that aren't there." But Hifa knew something was wrong. She started avoiding mirrors, afraid of what she might see next. Meanwhile, her beauty seemed to fade little by little. One evening, she looked at her grandmother's face and noticed something unusual. There was a little black hair on her grandmother's head and a sparkle in her eyes that made her look younger. Hifa understood what was happening but kept quiet. Days passed, and as Hifa became darker and older, the villagers barely recognized her. Some began talking. Hifa felt a strange chill whenever she passed a mirror and sensed her youth was being trapped. Desperate for answers, Hifa confronted her grandmother one evening. Her voice barely audible, she asked if her grandmother knew what was happening to her. Her grandmother looked at her with an unreadable expression and said, "Young woman, beauty is a curse. It fades and you must learn to accept it." But Hifa cried, "I'm getting older and darker by the day, and you're getting younger, grandmother. What is happening?" Her grandmother turned cold and told her not to be foolish. "What you see is simply time doing its work." That night, Hifa couldn't shake the feeling her grandmother was hiding something. Later, she returned to the living room and stood in front of the mirror. Placing her hand on the glass, she stared hard at her reflection. Her heart pounded as the face in the mirror sparkled back. Again, it was the beautiful girl with eyes glowing unnaturally. Hifa, startled, dropped the mirror, gasped, and fell to the floor. Determined to find the truth, Hifa waited until her grandmother left the house one morning. She searched every corner, hoping to find something to explain the strange events. Finally, she found a small dusty box hidden under her grandmother's bed. Inside were faded photographs, an old book, and an ancient journal. As she read the journal, her eyes widened. The truth became clear. The journal described a ritual to steal youth and beauty. Her grandmother had been transferring her aging reflections to the next woman in the family by trapping them in a mirror, taking their beauty in exchange for more years of youth and power. Tears filled Hifa's eyes as realization hit her. Her grandmother had been stealing her beauty. Just then, the door opened, and her grandmother stood in the doorway, her eyes filled with a strange rage. Stepping forward, her grandmother said loudly, "You were never supposed to find out." Why would you do this to me?" Hifa cried, feeling betrayed. "I am your granddaughter. Why?" Her grandmother began chanting spells, and Hifa was trapped in the mirror. This time, she was stuck in a dark, cold world filled with the spirits of the girls her grandmother had killed. Lost voices cried in sorrow. Despite her despair, a fierce determination burned within Hifa. She would not let her grandmother win. Days passed in the mirror's prison. Through cracks in the mirror, Hifa could see glimpses of the outside world. She watched as her grandmother radiated the youth she had stolen. Fury burned through Hifa, stronger than her grandmother's magic. One night, as her grandmother admired herself in the mirror, Hifa caught her grandmother's eyes. She raised her hand to the mirror and summoned all her strength. The glass began to crack. Her grandmother gasped and tumbled back in fear as Hifa forced her way out of the mirror. In a blaze of light, Hifa broke free, shards of glass scattering around the house. Her grandmother raised her hand to chant dark words, but Hifa was ready. She grabbed a shard of broken glass and held it high. "Your time is over," Hifa shouted, stepping forward. The shard glowed, reflecting her anger and resilience. As her grandmother continued chanting, the spirits of the girls she had trapped rallied behind Hifa, lending her their strength. Terrified, her grandmother's chants faltered. Hifa closed the distance and stabbed the glass into her grandmother's chest. Her grandmother screamed as the beauty she had stolen drained away, returning to its rightful owner. The room filled with light, and Hifa regained all she had lost. Her grandmother fell to the ground, old and wrinkled. Her dark magic vanished, and she was now trapped in the mirror. "You chose this, grandmother, but I forgive you," Hifa said softly. The spirits were freed, and silence settled in the room. Hifa gathered the mirror shards, glowing faintly as the magic faded. She wrapped them in cloth and buried them beneath the roots of an ancient tree, ensuring the mirror's dark power would never harm anyone again.